Okay, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. What a responsibility after the distinguished guests we just heard. But I will try to give you some reflections based on our experience working in a number of European countries. When I was invited to talk about some issues concerning what is quality education, what does it make it, what do we put into that? I thought first I would try to talk about what do we experience and what do we see. So 2 words about who we are. And I cannot, yes, here. The European Wergeland Center is a center placed in Norway, as you said, and it was created by the Council of Europe and Norway to work on education for democracy and human rights. We are working primarily towards educators, from teachers to principals, from schools to higher education, but also we work with authorities. And this is an important part because it's not just the implementation of policies into practice, but also coming with experiences from practice to policies. That's the countries we are working with. So, when I saw the first, what is quality education? And I bring this, which of course is very well known to you, but why do I put it here? Because it is for the first time a UN document is referring to quality education and education to ensure the sustainable development in the future. But in order to be of quality, it needs to have education for human rights, education for global citizenship. It needs to address gender equality. It needs to address value and diversity. So that's a really important document, which is preparing young people to cope and to live and to thrive in the future. You need to include all these elements. Then I went to see what Europe and the Council of Europe defines. How do they define quality education? And I went to a recommendation that's from 2012 that puts a list of items. It is longer than this. I just shorted it. But for the first one is quality education is an education that gives access to all pupils and students, and based, of course, in the taking particularly into account the most vulnerable ones. Is an education that gives access to secure and safe environments where this education can be provided. Is an education that takes into account also each pupil and student's personality and talents and develop to their full potential. Is an education that promotes democracy, respect for human rights and social justice. Is an education that which enables students to develop, and this is key, appropriate competencies, self-confidence and critical thinking, not just to become, to improve their employability, but also to become responsible citizens of their societies. It's an education that also passes on their values, local and cultural values to their pupils, but also that equip the pupils the ability to make their own decisions. It's an education that certifies their learning in a transparent and fair way. It's an education who relies on qualified teachers and is free of corruption. Basically, this is based on a vision of education, and in the Council of Europe, you hear this often that they present it, but in other organizations, sometimes it's not as prominent as this. When we talk about what vision of education, a friend of mine of the Council of Europe, usually he turns to a sociologist that says the answer to what type of education we want lies on the answer to another question, is what type of society we want for our children to live in. This is what Eugenio Tironi said, and it's absolutely true. So if we want an education that it is to develop the person, is for personal development. Also, we want an education that prepares our young people to live and for the labor market. We want an education that prepares young people in order to develop and maintains a broad knowledge base, the research part, but also, and this is really, really key, we want an education which prepares for life as active citizens in complex democratic societies. And all these purposes are interlinked, and they have equal value, and they are complementary. And in here, the systems, the educational system, they have a huge responsibility to make sure that all these citizens, they have access to education throughout their lives. So if we really mean that preparing for democracy is a priority of the educational systems, then schools and universities need to be able to have frameworks to be able to specify what is as the students they need to know, understand, being able to do at the end of their schooling and studies, and maybe also refrain from doing if ethically it is not correct. So I want to see there are a number of frameworks that are looking into this issue of competencies and the competences that need to be developed by young people. And I took first, of course, the Council of Europe, because we are a child of the Council of Europe, and we work basically on that. And this is because Council of Europe went very early, starting working in 2013 on developing this reference framework, and took into account more than 100 different frameworks in Europe just to come up to this one, trying to devise a system and putting what is democratic competence based on values, skills, attitudes, knowledge, and critical understanding. But you can find this one, for example, which is the OECD Compass 2030, where this very similar, looking into skills and knowledge and attitudes and values, of course, putting the action much more at the center, and the students' well-being and agency. But sometimes when you are in conferences in other places, then it's quite heated discussions concerning, okay, we need to prepare for the future, but what about the labor market? This is quite important, entrepreneurship and so on. This needs to be at the core. And yes, it needs, because they are not exclusive. And I looked into the World Economic Forum. They presented a report some months ago called The Future of Jobs report. Is from October 2020. And by looking into what companies are asking from their working force, looking into LinkedIn and Coursera, they put together the top 10 skills they foresee in the working force will need to have. And if you look into that, and I look into these other two frameworks, it's a lot about the same things. They are talking about analytical thinking, as the minister said, is about the active learning, the autonomous learning, the capacity to resolve very complex problems, looking things from a different angle. It is about resilience. It's about tolerance, flexibility, and reasoning and creativity. So you see, it's not a contraposition. We need to prepare young people to live in a future and to thrive and to cope and to come up with their own solutions. And it's not either for the labor market or to live together in complex and diverse societies. Now, we were talking about competencies of young people, the competencies they need to shape their future. In the US, they use a word I really like. They say students, they need to cope because they live in a VUCA world. VUCA meaning it's a world which is with a lot of vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the task then of this educational system is to prepare students for this future, to develop resilience. Because the crisis, we know, they are in line. We have the health crisis now, the economic crisis as well, but then the climate change crisis. And they need to learn, and they need to cope, and they need to come up with their own solutions. And we know that many countries are actually undergoing curriculum reform at the moment. Norway just finished last year. We know Lithuania is in the process right now. And most of these countries are going to put in these transversal competencies, well-being, democracy, environment, entrepreneurship, and the center of the curriculum. And this is excellent, because good policies, good legal frameworks can give the time and space that teachers need in order to address issues that are of concern for young people. And I have to say, concerning reforms, the Nordics are particularly good at processes. I live in Norway, but I'm not Norwegian, so I'm safe to say it. It's really good how they develop these very inclusive and transparent processes involving a broad range of stakeholders, how they communicate it broadly, how there is this sense of accountability towards the feedback received, and everyone knows when is going to happen what. So it's not for the show. And by experience, I know that in other countries, it's not exactly the case. And this is really critical to create this ownership. When these legal frameworks are ready, when the curriculum is ready, then it's the implementation which is absolutely key. And so you have a range of people on board because they know what they have been communicating and they have been participated into that. So implementation is key, and in here it's also key to look at the voice of young people. And I saw a video a week ago, a young person saying, yes, everyone is talking about the need to prepare us for the future. We are the future. Listen to us as well. And this is something in there, because in many cases, this listening to students' voices and students' concern is part of the rhetoric, but in practice, sometimes it's not totally there. There was a report in the UK after the school closure, the first round, where they put together a committee to deal with the issues, how to open schools again. And they actually didn't have any young people present. So it's about the young people, but they need to be on board. And what is this young people is concerned about that we need to listen and we need to respond to? The first thing it was mentioned by the Minister of Finland as well is the issue of the environment. 90% of European young people, there was a survey last week from the European Commission, 90%, they mean that the most difficult challenge they will have in their lives will be the climate change and environmental degradation. So the question is, are our educational systems preparing climate literate youth? Are we responding to that properly? Are we providing with the tools they need in order to create their solutions and to be global citizens? We know, for instance, that in many countries, among them Germany, they have been very long traditions to work on consumer awareness, the link to the sustainability, to the production, to human rights, and so on. So this is something that we needs to be very present. Another area also mentioned by the previous speakers, where young people are extremely concerned, is of course the issue of fake news and media literacy. Many young people have problems distinguishing between facts and fake news, but they perceive it. And this is again some data from the Eurobarometer, perceived like about 85% says this is a program. This is a challenge for our democracies. So we need to address all these issues in the curriculums, in the plans. Another issue mentioned, of course, is well-being, that the pandemic has actualized enormously. And I'm not really sure, and many teachers I'm speaking to are a bit afraid, and they feel not properly prepared to deal with a whole range of new issues coming after the pandemic. It was very interesting to see that in New Zealand, the Prime Minister last week already have put in place a new program for school districts addressing well-being, bullying, loss crisis. It's a number of, so this is something that we really need to look up to. The last issue that I think the extremely important that schools and the systems are addressing is the issue of empowering young people, empower their political efficacy. We know in many of our societies there is a crisis of trust towards the systems. In many cases, young people have found this kind of apathy, that they cannot trust the system, that they cannot influence. And this capacity to believe in their own ability to participate, to make change, their participation matters. This is political efficacy. This is really important to promote and to work. And we know, based on research, and some research in the Nordic countries, from Sweden, for instance, that shows that schools are absolutely key to boost this self-efficacy, to boost this self-confidence in young people, that it really matters if they engage and they can make a change. And this is another element which is important for schools, because we know that young people coming from the socioeconomical sectors of society with kind of high socioeconomic background, they are more prone to participate, while other kids coming from lower socioeconomic background, they are less inclined to take part. So if schools are really key in promoting this, restoring more equality in participation. So it's a really key role. And 2 words about this picture. This picture is about a program we have which is called Learning Democracy at Utøya, that we do in Norway with the support of the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research, where we are looking exactly how can young people work on human rights and democracy, where their starting point is their own very daily life. And this is where the quote is from one young student, maybe 14, 15, and she or he said that the most important part of this program for him or her was the possibility, the understanding of the possibilities to contribute and to make a change. So addressing this is absolutely key. And then since we are talking about the Nordic and Baltics, you know, we just heard PISA, the Baltics are doing fabulous. Estonia is top of the class. Concerning ICCS, which is the International Civic and Citizenship Surveys, the Nordics are doing pretty well, I have to say. And it has been consistent since during the last 20 years and so. And I borrowed this slide from a brilliant researcher from NOA, from the Oslo Met University in Oslo, who did a research study about the Nordics and the students, and trying to understand why what is the focus of citizenship education in the Nordics, and this based on the feedback from principals from lower high school. And as you can see, the Nordic countries, and Norway and Finland and Sweden, they put emphasis in different things concerning civic and citizenship education, except for one very relevant common feature, and it is a strong focus on promoting students' critical and independent thinking. So if there is something called the Nordic model, I think this is a very key element. And when trying to say, when she was asked what is the reason for that, and she said, well, it's not clearly by the ICCS study, but probably it's based on cultural and history, and this the liberal educational ideas, this Bildung, where a lot of focus is put on individual autonomy and co-determination and solidarity. But again, this is key in all the Nordic countries. And what about teachers? If we are talking about the competencies young people need to develop in order to cope and to thrive and in the future, are we preparing teachers to deliver these competencies? What kind of competence do they need? And how are the educational systems provided them? Here I went from the local to the global. This is an example of a program we had with the Nordic Baltics, 18 and 19, where we involve educators from Latvia and Lithuania and Finland and Norway. And we work with the Education Development Center of Lithuania, the National Center for Education of Latvia, and the Finnish National Agency for Education. And the whole idea was to work with educators on how to teach controversial issues, how to deal with the very difficult issues in the classroom, how to boost the confidence and the knowledge about this, and how to create safe spaces. We work on Council of Europe EU materials. We translated it to the Baltic and the Scandinavian countries. What we learned from this, this is the 4 points here are the lessons learned from that project. The first one they said was absolutely crucial to have open classrooms with the spaces for discussions, with rules for discussion, with this safety net where people feel the trust to teachers and other students to be able to bring these kind of issues, which were really difficult. We also learned that by working that way, the schools experienced that the relations became better. It was a much more fluid communication with the teachers and the students and the parents. And this influenced again on the motivation. And of course, a lot of noise created by conflicts kind of diminished. The other element that they say was really crucial, and this we hear again and again, is that teachers, they learn best by sharing with other teachers, peer-to-peer learning. And this is what we learned from the pandemic, of course. It's what others are doing, how they are doing. So that was crucial. And the last point is that in many of these very difficult issues that teachers are addressing now, they sometimes feel they don't have the competence or the knowledge. There are many very competent civil society organizations that can come and work with the schools in addressing that. So that was a very local, small project. What does the European TALIS says? So I went a bit to say, what are the teachers? And you are many teachers here. What are you saying about what are the challenges? What are the challenges for the environment, for the classrooms, and the things you see in the future? And this is from TALIS 2018, so it's before the pandemic. This is a really important point. Well, teachers 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they said one of the most important things teachers would like to have support to is to, and this is just for initial teacher training as well and in-service teacher training, is to have more support, to have to get pedagogies promoting soft skills, and soft skills with it referring to how they can address complex competencies they need to support their students in critical thinking, in problem solving, and how to assess these competencies as well. So this is something that they really say, if you want to get a better teacher quality, better teaching in general, we need to have support in that. Teachers were also 30% of those participating in the TALIS, the Teaching and Learning International Survey. They said that teaching in multicultural classrooms was difficult, was challenging. And this is an increase, is 1 out of 3 that is saying that they need support in order to develop the competencies and the techniques and to deal with diversity and multicultural classrooms. There was also a concerning these learning communities. Again, the issue of learning communities. Teachers learn better by, they said that the most impact in professional development programs are those that are involving collaborative learning, involving working with other teachers, putting emphasis also in active learning. But when we see the kind of capacity building, the professional development programs that teachers attend to, most of them is about attending to a seminar, 76%, or reading. Very few are actually participating in this kind of ways of learning that they say, teachers, you are saying that you learn better by exchanging with your peers. So this puts authorities in a position you need to provide the space and the time for teachers to be able to work together, to exchange and to learn. The other element I would like to highlight from here is the issue that, and that was again before the pandemic, that a clear way to promote students' well-being, according to teachers, was to have more parents' involvement in the everyday life of schools, to understand what their children's concerns and challenges and opportunities are. So this really strengthening the cooperation with the parents was crucial. Then we got, of course, a pandemic. The situation changed for most of us, unprecedented, with a lot of challenges, and where teachers were really on the forefront and doing a fantastic work. And last week, I attended a seminar by the OECD and UNESCO, and there were teachers from all over the world. And what were they talking about? Yeah, first they said the role of teachers is changing. Of course, it's just going from being the expert that knows it all to a lot is about the social aspect of teaching, is the supporting, is the coaching, particularly in times of crisis. The soft skills, what they said, soft skills again, are as important as the academic skills, particularly in the pandemic. The teamwork, cooperation skills, resilience, all of these, they were more important than ever. So the countries that are not having that in the curriculum, they should really hurry. So this is the same. Multicultural classrooms, polarization is increasing, inequalities are increasing, the situations are quite difficult in many, many countries. They need to have support again. The peer learning dimension, here is again, that's what teachers are saying. They need to have more space and room, and the recognition that this is professional development in their systems as well. So how can we use this experience and what has happened during the last 1.5 years to try to design a new way of looking at teachers' professional development, where the peer-to-peer learning is actually recognized in a much stronger way than it is now. And of course, the well-being of the students, and this is something for the future. Teachers need to get much better prepared to deal with a number of issues that will stay with us for a long time. So to sum up, my message to educators, please continue with this fantastic job, particularly the tough time you have had with this energy and this inspiration, and continue not just adjusting, but try to reimagine another type of education. And for the policymakers, my message would be, I would never experience in my life such a broad support to education from every sector of society as we have it now. When the schools closed down, the whole society stopped. So it's a huge support from every sector in society, acknowledging the role of education for the stability of the progress of every society. So be bold and think about future, because what we want is this type of youth that is engaged, resilient, competent, profoundly democratic, finding their own solutions to change and to cope with the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Perona-Fjeldstad, Executive Director of European Wergeland Center in Norway. So now we have 15 minutes to a bit more explore the topic and your presentation, some of the emphases that you put. And first, I'll ask you a question about peer-to-peer learning that you emphasized. Do you have any good examples of peer-to-peer learning, whether in Norway or in other countries, where you saw this system working, or is your sort of call for more peer-to-peer formal mechanisms is kind of general, and we are just sort of starting with this?
Well, there are places where you have this very incorporated in a school. So the places where you develop the competencies are, for example, one of the cases is in Singapore, where this is really key. Each school has a system where there is persons in charge of developing certain parts of the curriculum, and the teachers, the first point of entry to professional development is within schools. In other places of Europe also, it's moving towards having. The problem many times is they don't have the space. They need, and the space, I mean the time within their working day to be recognized. So that's the appeal to those in charge of schools and so on, that recognize this is really key for teachers. So please give the space and the time within their working time to do so. But I would say that Singapore is doing quite well.
Okay, thank you. So what about this space then? You know, when we are looking at the schedule that, you know, that students have, and they already have a busy schedule, you know, how do you find this, that we would need sort of to create new subjects, new areas where we sort of, where we separately discuss democratic issues and human rights, or is it better to sort of incorporate already, you know, these issues into many other subjects, especially if we talk about, I don't know, history, if we talk about geography, maybe we can talk about cultures, if we talk about maybe citizenship. We, for example, in Lithuania have this type of class as well. What is the sort of best venue or venues to include this? Because often this discussion, you know, with the way, when I talk to teachers, they say, oh, we're already so busy and so overwhelmed with all the requirements that we need to do. Now, yet another one on our shoulders.
Yeah, I have heard that before. No, it's when in most places are going more to transversal approaches, and I would say in many of the countries we work with, we specialize. I really like when you use mathematics to discuss issues concerning human rights or the statistics, and then you are talking about numbers, but then you can discuss, for example, why the gender salary gap is there. So you talk about mathematics and you talk about numbers, but the examples you use to that are coming from other sources. Or we are working with a number of universities in Southern Europe, for example, where we work with the arts and human rights, and chemistry and human rights, and mathematics and human rights. Coding is too important just to leave people specialized in STEM. We need to bring democracy also to that. So it's very much about finding the examples that make sense within the premises of the subject. So you don't have to, it's not in addition. Because, for example, coming back to this climate change, which is such a concern for young people, you cannot just solve it by bringing biology or economy or political things or cultural. It's all of them together. You need to see, try to find solutions with incorporate different elements. So, and this is in many other cases as well. So please, from within the subject, there are ways of doing that. And methods and student-centered methods are very much close to citizenship as well, motivating students particularly.
Okay. One more question now from the Slido platform, and it's sort of a very, it's almost a rhetorical question, but I'll still want to translate it. And it says, shouldn't education be the source for a young person to kind of recreate themselves, to learn more about themselves, and to create more meaning, and in order for them to be able to transform the complex reality that they are facing or will be facing in the future?
Well, yeah, the short answer is absolutely. The first part it needs to is the whole education process is building a child to transform and to develop the competence and the confidence in themselves, to reflect about their world and so on. So this, I think, is quite important to strengthen this self-confidence in young people, because they have a tough task in front of them, but they need to learn how to learn throughout life. So it's getting the self-confidence, the trust that they can make choices, and that it matters if they engage. I think if you have these very engaged young people, then they can move mountains.
Okay, I would like to return, because we still have a few minutes for discussion, so I would like to return to your quote of your colleague, sociologist, where you were saying that what type of society do we want our children to have sort of in the future, okay?
Yeah.
We should ask this question. This question is often asked, but the issue is that, you know, how do we agree on it, right? We have very different versions of it. And given what you already talked about, fake news, about these kind of bubbles in social media, we often get more kind of animosity, and the discussions become really heated, you know, about what type of society we want to create. So, I mean, it's one thing to ask the question, obviously. It's another thing to really find some sort of common ground, which is, it appears sometimes that it's slipping. Do you find this in your own work, that it's getting more complex to find common ground, or no?
It is. Sometimes we need to have the 50s and 60s back to the classrooms. That will be part of the. Yeah, but the whole idea is actually to work with young people to learn to live in complex societies where we are not always in agreement. And it's not a meaning that we need to have a consensus of certain issues, but the ability to recognize the other person's right to think differently and to stand for that, and that's important, and to discuss and debate in a civilized way where certain things can be thought from different standpoints. And I would say in some cases, some values, it might be more absolute, like the respect for human life, or the respect for the dignity of others, and respect for others' right to think differently, and so on. But it's important to train young people to agree, to disagree, to see things from different angles, and so on, because it is getting more complex. And the issues of media literacy is absolutely central. It's getting more and more difficult for young people.
I think it's also getting more, it seems like we also have kind of more and more issues to consider, right? We already talked about the sort of, the difficulty of adding more subjects or more kind of complexity to the already current contents in schools. And it seems like this amount of contents is growing, right? So where do you sort of how would you draw the lines? Do you find that, you know, maybe a number of topics should be maybe reworked, or the whole curriculum should be revamped in general to kind of think the way you sort of suggest, in a way that we integrate everything, starting whether we are talking about math, chemistry, we kind of more have integrative learning in terms of subjects. You know, some of these initiatives actually started probably, you know, in the Nordics, trying to blend subjects and then think in this more complex way about environment, about challenges that we have. So they are sort of multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary challenges. Is that the way to go?
Well, I would say it's a much more forward-looking way to go, because what we are preparing young people, the knowledge, just knowledge will not do. So just put the emphasis in learning to learn, learning to solve complex issues from different perspectives, learning to cooperate, work with others, to find the solutions. So it's more deep learning than just an enormous amount of data from other stuff. So maybe it's less cram of a curriculum, but deep learning, and these competencies, learn how to learn, this is absolutely critical, because they will have to continue doing that for the rest of their lives. So we cannot pretend that kids will be ready to, once they are finished with university, that's ready for life. We know it's not the case. So this very competencies and the ability to learn throughout life, it's absolutely key, and maybe less facts and a bit of more deep learning.
So in a sense, it's almost not only less facts, but maybe less information in general, kind of care about, it sounds to me like care about that they wouldn't lose the desire to learn and skills, to learn further. Because I feel like sometimes, at least in Lithuania, the discussions get to the point where, it becomes a lot about content, sort of, okay, which authors do we cover, for example, for, I don't know, like literature classes, not which sort of, how do we make kids appreciate literature, but sometimes it becomes more about, do we cover this and that, and is this author, it should be here and should be there as well. So is it, do we, maybe a way forward is kind of to limit content, in a sense, to have less in terms of content, but go deeper, as you suggest, and in that way we get kind of, less is more in that way.
Well, this is the focus the Norwegian reform has taken, where the contents, the issues that the teachers they need to deal with are much fewer than before, because they have the teachers, because they are professionals and they have the ability to choose some of the subjects and so on, and to choose the way to put it forward. So go deeper and less, because the problem was they felt that the students also sometimes they felt not motivated, where there was too much reaching all, as you said, authors and this and that. So the ability of teachers to choose and the freedom to choose and go deeper into some of the subjects and put it into relevant context, that's what they decided to do, and it has been in place since last year.
Okay. One final question then on the teachers, because it seems to me like this is sort of the essence of it all, right? If we are talking about any change or any sort of shift in curriculum, but also in the sort of environment, teachers become a crucial element for, for generating these discussions, for really finding angles that, that tick, that make them tick, make the students tick, and discuss this. So coming back to your sort of peer-to-peer learning and teachers, do we need then to really rethink teachers' education in some way? Or, what is your solution here? How do you, or you just work with teachers as you suggested, and that's the way forward? Or is there a need for a much more fundamental rethinking at universities, at schools that, prepare our future teachers?
Well, the situation is quite diverse, and there are a number of situations in different countries. I would say working with teachers in service, it's absolutely important, and giving these professional development mechanisms and schemes in place. Now, the working with the universities, those preparing future teachers, I know that in some countries they are lagging behind. I know that in some countries they have very progressive reforms in place, and the teachers they are supposed to implement the reforms. But some universities are kind of comfortable in their ways, and it takes time, particularly the bigger ones, to really move. So it's really important that they do look at this, and they do look to how to work with the schools and how to practice and provide teachers, students much more practice that with day-to-day in schools that it is the case now. In many cases, it's still very theoretical and a bit disconnected from other policies put in place. So absolutely, that's very, very key for universities to change as well, I would say. Okay. Not in all places, but in some places, yes.
Okay. I guess it's also, there is also the dimension, how do you see the dimension, just the very last, of this kind of, of the pandemic right now, and what does it do actually to education about democratic values, about these human rights and challenges? I find this as an opportunity. I don't know whether you find this as an opportunity, because often we kind of, we look and we say, it's bad, kids are suffering, they don't have enough, communication, they don't have enough sort of, the environment is not good enough, not stimulating enough, they don't have their peers to talk to. But on the other hand, maybe there is an opportunity here that we can really, grab and, on the other hand, push something further along.
Well, here there are a number of lessons learned, and I didn't have the time, but just to talk about our experiences in many countries. For example, the schools we have been working with for the longest, those schools who did have very good communication channels with the teachers, the principal, the students, trust with the parents, those were the schools that adjusted really quicker. We're a lot more quicker than the others, because everyone knew, and there was this situation of trust between the different actors, and they knew that they were all together. The communication worked fabulously in order to cope. Another case, for example, when you use these students center approaches, you give the students a voice, and they are really active. Those students, that was really important when they were on the other side of the screen. The teachers were using these methodologies not to discuss about human rights, but to ask the students, what do you think? Let's take a quiz or something to discuss in the next thing you would like us to do. All these small things that they motivate students and to so all these kind of pedagogies that we were preaching for ages, well, actually, when the crisis came, they said, well, they really worked. They helped me get the students motivated, not to lose them, and so on. So in that sense, yes, it's an opportunity to really see. It's not because we want to be nice to each other. It's because it works, and it really help teachers to cope with a number of issues. This is the kind of the nice the part. But of course, this pandemic is bringing huge challenges for many groups that are going to be lagging behind in a very difficult way. So, of course, the other thing is that the way we all gain digital competence was enormously, was just jump things that we didn't think was possible. We know we are dealing with different channels, and we are using it. So it will be easier to work more, exploring more blended learning approaches and some other ways of reach out, but not just as an emergency response to a crisis. That's a more long term.
Okay.